Hello everyone, my name is Maria Lamardo. I'm a Senior Manager for Technology Development Programs at CVS Health. My thoughts are my own. I'm also an accessibility advocate and a Vue.js community partner. And today I'm here to talk to you about how to prevent, catch, and fix accessibility issues. So before we get started, I do want to share a link to my slides, and here's a QR code as well. And I'm really excited to get into this topic. All right, so with that, let's go over what we're going to learn about today. We're going to learn about what accessibility is. We're going to dive a little bit into digital accessibility and some common accessibility issues and how to fix them. So let's get into a little bit quick introduction of what accessibility might mean for us. First, before we get into the digital accessibility, I want to talk about accessibility in physical spaces. So here we have a building entrance with multiple staircases, and I'm not seeing any ramps and no elevator, at least from the outside. So unless there's an elevator on the inside of the building, this is not a very accessible entrance. If you were, for example, in crutches or needing a wheelchair, this would be pretty hard to get to the top of the staircase. All right, looking at this next example, this is an outdoor staircase leading to multiple floors with a winding ramp zigzagging from left to right. I think it goes from left to right about 9 times before you can get all the way up. And though this is visibly appealing and it seems to solve a problem, this is actually not very accessible. So somebody would need to go again 9 times to get all the way up. There's no rail along the way in the ramp, so there's no way for you to stop safely if you needed to take a break. And here we're moving into a more accessible example where we have an accessible ramp on the side of the building. And although this is accessible, this does require people to go through the side of the building instead of going through the main entrance like almost everyone else. So this is kind of where I want us to think about, right? There are ways to make the experiences accessible, but there are different ways that we can handle those experiences. Now let's take a look at some accessible ramps that ran into some problems along the way. So on the left-hand side, we see a permanent structure that is blocking the ramp. So there's a street pole positioned right in the middle of the ramp, blocking its path, which again, somewhere in the implementation of this design, something went wrong. And here we have another example of an object blocking the ramp. So it's an accessible ramp, but there's an oversized flower pot that was placed in the middle. And though it looks pretty, it doesn't function for somebody who would then need to move this heavy flower pot out of the way to make their way into the building. So again, this is kind of putting it in your head that design and implementation go hand in hand. You have to make sure that somebody understands the intent behind the design so that it's implemented correctly. Next, we have a pretty accessible ramp, right? It just leads right to the entrance of the building. There's no flower pots or street poles, which is great. So one can easily go to the ramp to access the main entrance. However, I do want to talk about the idea of inclusive design, which is designing things to be as usable for as many people as possible. So consider this building that doesn't have any steps and everyone has the same access to the main entrance. This is a much more inclusive design because it creates a better experience for everyone. So let's talk about disabilities around the world. Well, there are about 1.3 billion people worldwide who have identified a disability. That makes it 1 in every 6 people around the world, which is about 16% of the global population. And they actually have a spending power of $1 trillion. So when we're not building accessible products, we're losing out on a huge audience. Now, there are many different types of disabilities, and they can be classified into many types, each with their own consideration. And here are a few categories. Now, understanding these different types of disabilities is crucial to designing and developing inclusive products, services, and environments. And we want to ensure that we're building an accessible experience for everyone. So I do have some awesome demos available here for you that kind of walk you through how somebody might use a screen reader, voice control to control their computer with their voice, and Braille. We don't have time to go over it today, but I highly encourage you to watch these demos to understand how people interact with these technologies and how they might navigate the web. So let's talk a little bit about how this all applies into digital accessibility and who it could benefit. So luckily, W3C has created WCAG, which is Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, which some of you might have already heard of. And these are guidelines that provide kind of guidance for content creators to provide a better way to create digital content to be more accessible. And I do want to mention that although this is a great place to start, you can still meet all of the requirements outlined here, and your application could still be made more accessible for somebody. We want to make sure that you're working really hard to bring lived experiences into the design process and making sure that people who have real experience give you feedback on how they will be using your application and content. So let's go over some of the key principles of accessibility. Now, these are the 4 main guiding principles, also known as POUR. That's how they're abbreviated. And these are based out of those WCAG guidelines. So the 4 main guiding principles, the first one is perceivable. So that first P in POUR. This means that users must be able to perceive the information that is presented, meaning that it shouldn't be invisible to their senses, right? Next one is operable. Meaning that the interface, forms, controls, and navigation must be operable. So you shouldn't be requiring some interaction that somebody just cannot perform. You also want to make sure that information that is presented and operation for the user interface is understandable so that it doesn't go beyond the user's understanding. And you also want to make sure that your applications are robust, meaning that users are able to access the content as technologies advance. So let's talk about some common accessibility issues and how you can, avoid them, fix them, and catch them. So WebAIM Million Report is an accessibility evaluation of the homepages of the top 1 million websites. And they found in 2023 that 96.3% of all homepages have accessibility issues. And they have an average of about 50 errors per page. Now, they did find that 96.1% of all of these errors are falling into only 6 categories. And I'm actually going to jump over to that report to show you what this looks like. But this is an example of what the report looks like. And as you can see, they even break it down into the top type of errors that they see. And you can see how those errors changed from the past couple of years. So going back to our presentation. So here are some of the tools that you can use for automated testing. However, automated testing will only catch about 35 to 40% of accessibility issues, and there will always be a need for manual testing. So here we have Lighthouse automated tool, AxDev tools, IBM accessibility checker, web accessibility evaluation tools. Again, there are many tools available. So let's take a look at color contrast text issues. The requirement here is that you provide enough color contrast between text and its background. And the impact is that the text will then be able to be read by people who have low vision or cannot see a full range of colors. So let's take a look at this activity. In this activity, I have 2 examples of text. The first one says this color contrast is too low, and it's a light green on top of white background. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm using Chrome. I'm going to go ahead and inspect that element. And as you can see, if I select the color for that specific element, we see that Chrome DevTools shows us that it has a contrast ratio of 1.22, which shows us that it's not enough contrast. And if I expand on that, you can see that 2 lines kind of appear on the color picker. And as I move the color selection, I can see that the color contrast ratio score changes, and I'm able to meet different criteria for WCAG. So as you can see, as I get a little bit darker, so it's a higher contrast between that white background, I kind of check both AA and AAA versus staying between the 2 lines, I only check AA. Okay, so I do want to show you this color contrast checker, which is from WebAIM. Now, what they do here is they allow you to test a couple of different things. So you can change the foreground color, which is the color of your text. So for example, I'm going to go a little bit lighter to fail some tests here. But as you can see, if I change the foreground color, it updates my color contrast ratio, and it also updates some examples that you can find underneath. So it updates the normal text, large text, and graphical objects and user interface components. So it also gives us AA and AAA scores. And as you can see, as I start kind of editing the other colors, like the background color, it also changes the score. Again, it's checking for that contrast between the foreground color and background color. So this is a great tool as you're designing for your applications. So again, automated tools will catch color contrast issues, but manual checks will also help you miss some of those automated issues, like color contrast in placeholder text, which there are some issues with using placeholder text. And here are some resources that are really helpful. Now, going into missing text alternative issues. The requirement here is that we provide a text alternative for non-text content so that this can be changed into different forms, right? Whether it's changed visually, auditorily, or any other type of combination. And we do recommend that this is automated for testing, which will catch when something is missing in alt text, but manual testing is really going to give you a sense of when something has a meaningful and descriptive alt text. And here's a resource that gives you an idea of how you can choose an alt text. And it's kind of like a decision tree on how to choose the right one and when you need one. So going back to the presentation, here is an image, which is kind of like a puppy rolling on the ground next to toilet paper. Now I've given this first image an alt text that says puppy rolling on the grass with Scott's super soft toilet paper, which might be great if my purpose of adding this image is to really highlight the toilet paper and making it fun, right? But let's say that instead I was running a doggy adoption agency and I wanted you to come adopt my puppy. So instead I might use something like an adorable and happy puppy rolling on the grass ready to be adopted. So again, you want to make sure that the description that you're giving the image matches the intent of you using the image. And if you have a decorative image like this, like maybe a background or something decorative, you can hide it from assistive technologies by just giving it an empty alt text, or if you're using an SVG, you can say ARIA hidden equals true, and that will just make sure that, you know, it's marked as decorative and they can be skipped. Now moving into empty linked text issues. So you want to make sure that every link, you're providing linked text or text associated with the link that describes the purpose of the link's destination. And that way people will understand the purpose of the link and determine if they want to follow the link. So automated tests will help you catch empty links, but manual text will also give you an idea of when something is meaningful and descriptive. So let's take a look at this example of links. I'm going to go ahead and turn on my screen reader.
Voiceover on. Skip to content. Short.
Okay, so right now I'm going to pull up a list of links.
Window spots menu. Links menu. You are currently in a voiceover.
So voiceover allows me to pull up a list of links. So I just want to show you all of the links that appear on this page so we can see how useful it is when it is descriptive. So I can kind of navigate from link to link.
Visited link. Visited link. Patterns. Link. Practices. Link. Index. Link. About. Link. Read this first. Link. About this example. Link. Examples.
So imagine if instead of this being really descriptive list of link, if everything said learn more, read here, click me. I wouldn't know where those links would lead me, right? So adding very descriptive, meaningful.
Voiceover off.
So adding very descriptive and meaningful link text is very helpful. Next, let's talk about missing form input labels. The requirement here is to provide labels for form input fields that describe the input's purpose. The impact is that people will know what the input data is. And though automated tests can catch missing label issues, you also want manual tests to make sure that you have proper naming. And here are some good resources for it. So in this example, I'm going to be in Chrome DevTools, and I'm under the Accessibility tab inside Chrome DevTools, and I'm inspecting the input field. So you could see in here, there's a section called Computer Properties that allows you to see the name of that specific input. So you can see that the name is name, and it's actually coming from the label within that's, you know, grabbing it from the for attribute, which is name. And this is exactly what we want to see. So assistive technologies are actually going to read this computer property name back to assistive technology. So this is why it's so important to have this defined in here. So one way to kind of make sure that you're grabbing the right name is kind of looking, inspecting, using this inspecting tool and make sure that you're grabbing the name that you're intending. Looking at empty button issues, buttons must have a programmatic name similar to those input fields. That way, assistive technologies can grab that information and send it back to the users. So for example, we'll go over an example, but you can use automated testing to make sure that something has a programmatic label or name. So in here, I'm again inspecting that button inside that accessibility tab, and you could see that the name is search. And in this example, because it's an image, and let's say that the image just didn't carry over an alt text, or it has an empty alt text from my library of images, I've actually gone ahead and given this button an ARIA label, which kind of becomes the new name of that element. You can also do something like this next button, where you're grabbing that name from something else that's visible on the page. So I've used ARIA labeled by to label this element with something already existing on the page. And again, all of these examples are linked in here if you want to take a look at the code. Looking at missing document languages, you want to make sure that you're setting the language attribute on the page. That way, assistive technologies and user agents render the text accurately. For example, if you have an English page and the language on the page is set to French, it might read this with like a French accent and it's not going to grab it the most accurate, especially if you have like sections of your page that change languages as you go. Make sure that you're setting the language for those blocks of text. Now, automated tests can determine if a language is set, but you might want to manually check that the correct language is checked. And you could check out these two different sites with different languages set to them. Now, let's talk about missing ARIA attribute issues. The requirement here is that all user interface components have a corresponding name, role, states, properties, values, all programmatically available. We'll talk a little bit about what this means, but the impact here is that assistive technologies can use all of this information to understand about when something is active, is something set, help them track the status of such an interface, like a user interface control. So let's take a look at a tab's activity, but I do want to show you that automated testing will catch some attributes and values that are missing, but you really have to test custom components manually. So let's take a look at this example, right? So I'm going to just tab through and I'm just hitting tab, shift tab. So, interesting that I'm not tabbing to the second tab, but I'm actually going to be using my arrow keys to navigate through that. But if I didn't know that that's the expected functionality, how would I know how to build this correctly? Like, what kind of guidelines exist out there for me to understand how to build something like this, especially because in HTML, there doesn't exist a semantic element that says tab interface. This is, right, a tab. So there actually exists an ARIA authoring practices guide that allows you to kind of look through different custom components, and it kind of walks you through how to build them. So I'm going to go all the way down to where we have tabs, so we can take a look at some of the expected functionality here. So if we look at this, it kind of talks to you about the pattern, some of the pieces that need to exist in this tab, component. And then as we go down, they do give you some examples of tabs with automatic activation or manual activation. And then you have keyboard interaction. So expected results from keyboard users on how they expect this component to behave. So as you tab, the focus moves to the first tab, and then you're going to be using your arrow keys to move between tabs. So that's why we are building it this way. And if we go all the way down, they also talk about some ARIA role states and properties that you might need to manually set to make sure that this is working properly. And you can kind of check out the code that they provide in the examples to get a better understanding. And again, I provided those resources here. Now, since we talked about ARIA, let me just call out that no ARIA is better than bad ARIA. So remember that WebAIM million report that I was talking about, where they tested the home pages? Well, when they tested, they found that home pages with ARIA present actually averaged 68.5% more detected errors than those without ARIA. And this is because if you misuse ARIA, you might actually break some of the native functionality that is built into HTML. And when you misuse ARIA and aren't following those best practices, it doesn't communicate the right things to assistive technologies, and it might actually break that functionality. So again, really rely on that patterns of ARIA authoring practices guide when you're using ARIA. And reach out to me if you have questions. I'm always happy to help. Again, certain web components require ARIA to expand on native HTML functionality, like that tab interface we just went over. But some have it built in already. So with that, I will open it up to any questions. Feel free to reach out to me anytime if you don't get a chance to ask me during this talk. Thank you so much.